So a couple of groups have managed to capture those key elements of practice to improve time management, and there's some really, really good suggestions, really thoughtful responses on there. So thanks for that. We're not going to go through them because, in absolute irony, time management is not my strength today. So moving on then to thinking about systems for evaluating and evidencing practice. Oh, sorry, I've jumped. Staff management and training. So this was the next subsection, staff management and training, thinking about how we bring about cultural change, transformational change in settings, considering the staff management and training needs, professional learning needs. So these are some of the key elements that came through the asynchronous learning around the needing to be real clarity on roles and responsibilities in settings. Practitioners need to understand how they can support learners with ALN. We can see from all of the work that we've done around the changes to the role of the ALN Co, that actually that changing role in supporting and leading others in their professional development and professional practice is a shift. It's a shift in thinking. So it's really important to get that clarity, and that we need to identify the gaps and opportunities for professional learning, professional development, and that staff need that support and understanding. I can see in all of your responses to the last task and the previous two that acknowledging that staff need to be supported, and they need to be celebrated, and they need to be shown the where to go to get further development and support is really kind of crucial to the role. So we're not going to go into a breakout for this because we haven't got time, but I just want to give you a couple of minutes to think about some of these questions and pop some of your thoughts in the chat function, actually, as a whole group. So thinking about your own experiences, I want you to have a think about the professional learning needs, short and long term, of staff in your settings. What are the gaps and opportunities for staff development? So where are the areas for staff development that you are aware there are needs, where things need to be developed? How do you monitor success and value for money? This is a really tricky one, isn't it? Especially with, as we all keep, mentioning, the funding issues, the resource issues in education, the impact of long-term austerity, that often, as was said earlier today, often it's just a couple of colleagues prioritise to go and attend training events. And then there's that expectation they'll come back and cascade that information and influence practice across the setting. How is that facilitated? And how do we know that that was successful, that training? How do we know it was value for money? So if anybody's got any ideas around any of those strands, if we just take a couple of minutes to have a think about it and just pop some of those ideas in the chat. So a need is that a need, Annie, that you've identified, training on specific learning needs, or a strength of the setting?
A bit of both, I think. Really, we do have training for, particularly for ASC and things like that. My class have more profound and complex difficulties, and with new staff coming in, there isn't always the funds for training them specifically on those needs that they're coming into.
Okay, yeah. And do you have then a system for for staff who do have the training and the knowledge to pass it on? Anything formal?
Sometimes we were able to take inset days, and we have mini workshops going on to cascade that information down. Other times it's just a case of trying to do it on a day-to-day basis within the class, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a lot of reliance on that at times in settings, isn't there? That knowledge and expertise will be passed on from, you know, across staff teams without any formal mechanism being put into place. And of course, with the real kind of squeeze on everybody's time, that's not always possible. So that's sometimes a challenge. Kirsty's mentioning there the use of a staff questionnaire to identify areas for targeted training, which is fantastic. So that's that. How do we know what those gaps are? Things like the importance there of a whole school approach. That's absolutely important. That kind of shared vision, shared values, and as you say, everybody singing from the same hymn sheet is really crucial. Regular reminders of strategies. Staff having more opportunity to observe each other. Yeah, again, it's that squeeze on time though, isn't it? But I agree. I think, Annabelle, that's it's a really good way of sharing that knowledge and expertise across staff team, giving people the opportunity to go and observe and learn from one another. Because inevitably as well, if you've been given time released to go and observe a colleague, you've got then time to ask them questions and unpick stuff and learn together. So it's really fruitful, but it can sometimes be a challenge. Desired training opportunities as a specific function of the performance management process. Yeah, absolutely. I think more and more organisations are building that in, aren't they? That, you know, to that professional development conversation. So that's a useful way to keep a picture on. But I think one of the challenges for that is you don't necessarily know yourself if it's an area that you need that knowledge and expertise in. So that wider discussion, that opportunity to identify across the settings, often useful. Feedback sheets after training used in a more formal way to ensure things are followed up. Yeah, that's Annie, that's really useful as well. Fab. Okay, thanks guys. So in the asynchronous session, you were asked to evaluate and monitor staff performance in terms of inclusion. And you were asked, you know, how can you evaluate and identify effective inclusive practices in your setting, and use this to evidence performance management in relation to ALN priorities. And that's really what this final task is focusing on, is that we want you to have a quick discussion about this. And we are really, really tight on time. So we're just going to jump into breakout rooms for a 5-minute discussion in our breakout rooms. And we want you to think about what data is it useful to gather to evaluate inclusive practice? What formal reporting tools might you use? And how would you use this data to evidence the inclusion agenda and plan for short-term and long-term goals? So just have that broad discussion around what are you looking at in terms of that inclusive practice data. We're just going to have 5 quick minutes. The link is in the chat, the QR code's on the screen. Don't forget to jot some of your key ideas down into the Padlet, because it'll really help you all when you come to do this section of your assessment. Fab, thanks, Rhiannon.